The night was heavy with the sound of crickets outside the small wooden house in rural Texas. Margaret Lee sat alone in her rocking chair, her hands resting on her lap, her eyes fixed on the old photograph of her late husband. The room was dimly lit, the shadows moving slowly across the walls as if whispering secrets she dared not share. It had been 3 years since John passed away. To everyone around her, Margaret was the quiet widow who tended her garden, went to church every Sunday, and lived a simple life with her only daughter, Clara. But behind her silence, Margaret carried a burden, a truth she had buried deep inside her heart. Clara never suspected anything. To her, her mother was just protective, sometimes too cautious, always reminding her to stay close, to avoid strangers, to be careful with promises. But Margaret knew that one wrong word, one careless memory, could lead Clara to the cottage. And the cottage was the last place she ever wanted her daughter to see. Margaret closed her eyes and remembered the scent of cedar and smoke, the way the Texas wind had howled through the cracks in the walls of that hidden cottage. Every corner of it was soaked in memories, both sweet and bitter. Love had blossomed there, yes, but so had grief. So had secrets that could tear her family apart. As the night grew darker, she whispered to herself, "I must never tell her. She must never know." Outside, a storm began to roll in. The wind rattled the windows, and thunder echoed across the wide Texas plains. For Margaret, it was a warning. The past was never truly silent. It waited, patient, like the storm on the horizon. And sooner or later, the storm would break. Clara Lee had always felt there was something unspoken in her mother's life. Growing up under the wide Texas sky, she admired Margaret's strength, but also sensed the silence that followed her like a shadow. One afternoon, while clearing out the attic, Clara stumbled upon a dusty trunk. The lock had long rusted away, and curiosity urged her fingers to lift the lid. Inside lay yellowed letters, brittle with age, tied neatly with a faded red ribbon. At the bottom, beneath the letters, she found an envelope marked with an address she did not recognize. Lake Cypress Cottage. Her heart quickened. She had never heard her mother speak of any place beyond their hometown. Clara slid the envelope into her pocket, determined not to mention it yet. Instead, she began to watch her mother more closely, hoping for a slip, a hint, something that might explain the mystery. That night, while Margaret prepared supper, Clara studied her mother's hands. They trembled slightly as she sliced vegetables. The storm from the previous evening had left its mark on her eyes, as if she too had been shaken by the thunder. Clara said nothing, but her thoughts churned like the restless wind outside. Something was hidden in the shadows of Margaret's past, and Clara intended to find it. When the house grew quiet and Margaret retreated to her room, Clara pulled the envelope from her pocket. The handwriting was unmistakable, rough yet careful, belonging to her father. She traced each curve of the letters with her fingertips. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It spoke of a cottage by the lake, of nights by the fire, of promises whispered beneath the stars. But there was something more, a warning. John had written, "If ever the cottage is spoken of, let it be with care. What lives there is more than memory." Clara felt a chill creep up her spine. She folded the letter quickly, afraid her mother might suddenly appear. She slipped it beneath her pillow, but sleep would not come easily. Images of the cottage she had never seen haunted her imagination. What did her father mean? What was it that lived there? By morning, Clara had made her choice. She would find the cottage, no matter what her mother wished to hide. Margaret sensed the change in her daughter. Clara's eyes lingered longer, her questions sharper though veiled in casual tone. A mother could always tell when something was stirring beneath the surface. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the Texas plains in hues of gold, Clara asked quietly, "Mama, did you and Daddy ever have another place? Somewhere you used to go?" Margaret froze, her spoon halfway to the pot. The question sliced through her like a blade. She forced a smile, shaking her head.
"No, child.
This house is all we ever had." But in her heart, panic grew. She hurried to her bedroom that night, unlocking the small wooden box where she had hidden the rest of John's letters. To her relief, they were still there. Yet something felt wrong, as though a thread had already been pulled loose. Margaret pressed the letters to her chest. She knew the truth could not stay buried forever. Clara could not resist. With the letter as her only guide, she borrowed a neighbor's truck and drove toward the address scrawled in her father's hand. The road stretched endlessly, fields rolling by, wind whipping through the open window. The further she traveled, the quieter it became. No towns, no voices, only the cry of hawks circling high above. At last, she reached a narrow path leading down toward the lake. Overgrown weeds brushed against the sides of the truck as she drove, until finally, through the trees, the outline of a cottage appeared. It stood silent, weathered by time, yet unmistakably alive. The wooden shutters rattled faintly in the wind, and the front porch sagged as though weary from years of waiting. Clara stepped out slowly, her boots sinking into the damp earth. She felt a strange pull, as though the air itself had been waiting for her arrival. She reached for the door. The door creaked open with a long, mournful sigh. Dust swirled in the pale shafts of light streaming through the windows. The scent of cedar and smoke lingered, just as her father had described. Clara wandered from room to room. A quilt still lay folded on the bed, a half-burned candle sat upon the table, and in the fireplace, blackened logs seemed as though they had been left only yesterday. It was as if the cottage had been frozen in time, untouched by the years. On the mantel, Clara found another letter, sealed and addressed not to Margaret, but to her. Hands trembling, she broke the wax. Her father's words spilled across the page. My dearest Clara, if you are reading this, then the secret has reached you. There are things about our family you do not yet know, things your mother wished to protect you from. But the cottage will tell you, if you are willing to listen. Clara's breath caught. The cottage will tell you. What did he mean? She turned sharply, certain she had heard a floorboard creak behind her. But the room was empty. Margaret awoke to find Clara's bed empty, her belongings gone. Panic struck like lightning. She rushed outside, scanning the horizon, praying she was wrong. But the truck was missing. She knew instantly where her daughter had gone. With trembling hands, Margaret saddled her old horse. The journey to the lake would be long and heavy with dread, but she had no choice. She rode hard, the wind tearing through her hair, her mind racing with memories she had buried for too long. She remembered the night she and John first fled to the cottage, hiding from debts, from shame, from whispers in town. The cottage had kept their secrets, but it had also demanded silence in return. Now Clara was there, alone, and Margaret feared the past was ready to speak. Clara spent the night in the cottage, though sleep barely touched her. The air was thick, heavy with unseen presence. At times, she thought she heard her father's voice, soft and low, carried by the wind through the cracks in the walls. She followed the sound into the back room. There, beneath a loose floorboard, she discovered a small wooden box. Inside were photographs she had never seen before, her father as a young man, her mother smiling in a way Clara had not seen in years, and another figure beside them, a man Clara did not recognize. On the back of one photograph was written, "For the promise we made." The walls seemed to close in around her, whispering, pressing, demanding. Clara clutched the box to her chest, her heart hammering. She did not know what promise had been made, but she knew now why her mother had kept this place hidden. The sound of hooves broke the silence. Margaret burst through the doorway, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear and anger. Clara stood frozen, the box still in her hands. "Give it to me," Margaret whispered, her voice shaking. Clara held her ground. "Why did you hide this from me, Mama? Why did Daddy write to me about this place?" Margaret's shoulders slumped, her strength draining away. She sank into a chair, her hands covering her face. For a long moment, only the sound of the wind filled the room. Then, with a broken voice, she began to speak. "Because the cottage holds more than memories, Clara. It holds the truth about who we were and what we did." Margaret told the story slowly, each word heavy with sorrow. Years ago, She and John had fled here not only to escape debts, but because of the man in the photographs. His name was Samuel. He had been John's closest friend and Margaret's first love. The three of them had shared the cottage, bound by a promise of loyalty and silence. But silence was fragile. When betrayal came, it shattered everything. Samuel vanished, leaving only rumors and questions. John had begged Margaret never to speak of him, never to tell Clara of the bond that had once tied them all. Clara listened, her heart torn between anger and grief. The walls of the cottage seemed to hum with the weight of the past, the voices of those who had walked its floors before her. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "This is why I never told you. Some truths are too heavy to bear. But now you know, child. Now you know why the cottage could never be spoken of." Outside, the wind howled through the Texas night. The cottage stood firm, a keeper of secrets, a witness to promises broken and truths finally unveiled. And within its walls, the silence was no more.